The crystal champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of Kensington Palace's private wing, sending fragments dancing across the ancient stones, like diamonds under the chandelier's glow. Prince Alexander's face was flushed with rage, his perfectly tailored dinner jacket askew, while his younger brother Prince Edmund stood frozen in the doorway, his phone still recording what would soon become the most explosive royal scandal in decades.
"You have no idea what you've just done," Alexander hissed, his voice barely controlled, years of royal training warring with raw fury.
20 years of service, 20 years of keeping your secrets, and this is how you repay me. Edmund's thumb hovered over the stop button, but something held him back. Maybe it was the weight of all those years of being overshadowed, of watching his older brother's mistakes get buried while his own were splashed across every tabloid. Or maybe it was the knowledge that their father, King William V, lay dying just 3 floors above them, and soon everything would change forever. The camera kept rolling as Alexander took a menacing step forward, his eyes wild with a desperation that no royal training could mask. Behind him, scattered across the Persian rug, lay the evidence of his secret dealings: bank statements from offshore accounts, photographs from private meetings, documents that could topple governments and destroy alliances built over centuries. "Edmund, stop recording." Alexander's voice cracked, the commanding prince replaced by a desperate brother. "Please, you don't understand what's at stake here." But Edmund did understand. For the first time in his life, he held real power over the brother who had always cast him in shadow. The brother who would be king. The brother whose secrets were about to change the monarchy forever. Outside, storm clouds gathered over London, as if nature itself sensed that the House of Windsor Mountbatten was about to face its greatest crisis. Inside the palace walls, 2 brothers stood on opposite sides of a chasm that 24 hours ago hadn't existed, but now seemed impossible to cross. The phone in Edmund's hand felt heavier than any crown, and he knew that whatever he decided in the next 10 seconds would echo through history. Would he save his brother and preserve the crown? Or would he finally step out of Alexander's shadow, even if it meant destroying everything their family had built? The recording timer ticked on. 3:47. 3:48, 3:49. And in that moment, as thunder rolled across London's skyline, Prince Edmund made the choice that would change the British monarchy forever. The morning of October 15th began like any other at Buckingham Palace, with the changing of the guard ceremony drawing its usual crowd of tourists and the royal staff moving through their practiced routines. Prince Edmund stood at his bedroom window on the 2nd floor, watching the red-coated guards march in perfect formation below. At 32, he had grown accustomed to being the spare, the insurance policy, the prince who attended charity galas and ribbon cuttings while his older brother Alexander prepared to inherit the throne. Edmund's reflection in the window showed a man who bore the Windsor features but somehow seemed softer than his brother. Where Alexander commanded rooms with his presence, Edmund preferred quiet conversations. Where Alexander made headlines, Edmund made genuine connections. The press called him the People's Prince, though he suspected they meant it more as a consolation prize than genuine praise. His phone buzzed with a text from his private secretary. "Sir, the King requests your presence in the blue drawing room at 2 p.m. Urgent family matter." Edmund frowned. Their father, King William V, had been increasingly private about family meetings lately, especially since his cancer diagnosis 6 months earlier. The nation knew the king was unwell, but the true severity remained a closely guarded secret. Down the hall, Alexander was having a very different morning. The heir apparent sat in his private study, surrounded by files that would never see the light of day through official channels. His hands shook slightly as he reviewed bank statements from 3 different offshore accounts, each containing sums that would make headlines for all the wrong reasons. The money had started as a simple arrangement, consultation fees for his expertise on Middle Eastern affairs. But what began as legitimate advisory work had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. The Kingdom of Bahrain had been generous to Prince Alexander over the past 5 years. Too generous, perhaps. What started as speaking fees and legitimate business partnerships had gradually shifted into territory that made even Alexander's experienced legal team nervous. Arms deals, oil contracts, and political influence, all flowing through channels that skirted the edge of legality, while technically remaining within the bounds of royal protocol. Alexander's phone rang, displaying a number he recognized but never wanted to see. Sheikh Rahman Al Khalifa, Bahrain's Minister of Defense, and Alexander's primary contact for their increasingly complicated business relationship. "Your Royal Highness." The Sheikh's voice carried its usual mixture of respect and underlying steel. "We need to discuss the timeline for our departure arrangements. The situation here is becoming unstable." Alexander closed his eyes. The Arab Spring had touched Bahrain years ago, but recent months had brought renewed unrest. The royal family there faced challenges that made British tabloid scandals look like minor inconveniences. Political prisoners, human rights investigations, and international sanctions were creating a perfect storm that threatened to expose everyone associated with the regime. I understand your concerns, Sheikh Rahman, but my position makes immediate travel complicated, Alexander said carefully, knowing his phones were monitored by security services. Perhaps we should postpone any meetings until the situation stabilizes. Your Highness, I'm afraid that isn't an option. The documents we've discussed, the ones bearing your signature, they're becoming a liability for both our governments. We need to discuss containment strategies immediately. The line went dead, leaving Alexander staring at his phone with growing dread. The documents Rahman referenced weren't just business contracts. They were agreements that, if revealed, would show the British royal family's direct involvement in arms sales to a regime accused of human rights violations. Worse, they would reveal Alexander's personal profit from deals that Parliament had specifically voted to restrict. At exactly 2 p.m., both brothers arrived at the blue drawing room, neither knowing that the other had received the same urgent summons. King William V sat in his favorite armchair, looking frailer than either son had seen him. At 68, the king had ruled for only 8 years after his mother's death, but those years had taken a visible toll. The cancer treatment had left him thin and pale, though his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him an effective monarch during turbulent times. "Sit down, both of you," the king said without preamble. "We need to discuss the future of this family, and I'm afraid recent developments have made this conversation urgent." Edmund exchanged glances with Alexander, noting his brother's unusual tension. Alexander's normally perfect posture seemed forced, and there was something in his eyes that Edmund had never seen before: fear. "Father, if this is about succession planning, I thought we had already established the protocols," Alexander said, his voice carrying forced confidence. "This isn't about protocols, Alexander. This is about survival." The king opened a folder on the table beside him, revealing photographs and documents that made Alexander's blood run cold. "The intelligence services have been monitoring communications between members of our family and certain foreign entities, communications that suggest business relationships that could compromise the crown." Edmund leaned forward, confused.
"What kind of business relationships?" The king's gaze fixed on Alexander, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny.
Your brother has been conducting private business with the Bahraini royal family for the past 5 years.
Business that has generated considerable personal wealth and, more importantly, created obligations that conflict with British foreign policy. "Father, I can explain," Alexander began, but the king raised his hand for silence. "The explanation is simple, Alexander. You've been taking money from a regime that our government officially criticizes for human rights violations. You've signed contracts that make you a stakeholder in arms deals that Parliament voted to restrict. And now, with the situation in Bahrain deteriorating, your business partners want you to disappear until the heat dies down." Edmund felt as if the room was spinning. Disappear? What does that mean? "It means," the king continued, his voice heavy with disappointment, "that your brother has been offered sanctuary in Bahrain until the political climate changes. It means he would leave Britain, abdicate his position in the line of succession, and live in exile rather than face the consequences of his choices." The silence that followed was deafening. Edmund stared at his brother, trying to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. Alexander, the perfect prince, the heir who had been groomed for kingship since birth, had compromised everything for money and was now planning to run away. "Alexander," Edmund said quietly, "tell me this isn't true." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Then, slowly, he met his brother's eyes. "It's more complicated than father is making it sound." "No," the king interrupted sharply. "It's exactly as complicated as I've made it sound. You've sold your birthright for Bahraini oil money, and now you want to abandon your country rather than face the consequences." Alexander's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what kind of pressure I've been under. Do you think it's easy being the heir? Do you think the allowance Parliament gives us is enough to maintain the lifestyle expected of future kings? I didn't have a choice." "You had every choice," Edmund said, his voice rising with anger he didn't know he possessed. "You had every privilege, every advantage, every opportunity that I never got, and you threw it away for money?"
Don't lecture me about opportunities, Edmund.
"You've lived your entire life in my shadow, never having to make the hard decisions, never bearing the real responsibility. You have no idea what it's like to carry the weight of the crown. And you've decided you don't want to carry it anymore, Edmund shot back. So you'll run away to Bahrain and leave me to clean up your mess. The king watched his son's argument with sad resignation. The decision has already been made, Edmund. Alexander will depart for Bahrain tomorrow night on a private jet. Officially, he's taking a leave of absence for health reasons. Unofficially, he's buying time for this scandal to blow over. And if it doesn't blow over? Edmund demanded. Then I abdicate the succession, Alexander said quietly, and you become heir apparent. The weight of those words settled over Edmund like a heavy cloak. Everything he had ever known about his life, his role, his future, had just changed in the span of an hour. He would no longer be the spare. He would be the heir to a throne that came with a crown tainted by his brother's greed and cowardice. There's one more thing, the king added, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctors have given me 6 months, perhaps less. Whatever Alexander decides about his future, it needs to happen quickly. This family cannot afford a prolonged constitutional crisis while I'm dying. Edmund felt as if he was drowning. In the space of an hour, he had learned that his brother was essentially a traitor, that he himself might soon be king, and that his father was dying faster than anyone had admitted. The careful, orderly world of royal protocol had collapsed into chaos. I need time to think, Edmund said, standing abruptly. We don't have time, Alexander replied. My flight leaves tomorrow at 11 p.m. If I'm going to go, it has to be then. Then go, Edmund said, his voice cold with disappointment. Run away to your friends in Bahrain, but don't expect me to cover for you when the truth comes out. As Edmund left the room, he could hear his father and brother beginning a heated argument behind him. But their voices faded as he walked through the palace corridors, past portraits of kings and queens who had faced their own crises with courage and honor. Tomorrow night, Alexander would board a plane and abandon everything their family had built over centuries. And Edmund would be left to pick up the pieces of a crown that might be too damaged to wear. The future of the British monarchy now rested in the hands of a prince who had never expected to rule, facing scandals he had never imagined, with time running out faster than anyone dared admit. As evening fell over London, Prince Edmund stood once again at his bedroom window, but this time he wasn't watching the guards below. He was watching his brother's windows across the courtyard, wondering if Alexander was packing for exile, or finally finding the courage to stay and fight for the crown he had spent his entire life preparing to wear. By tomorrow night, everything would change forever. The dawn of October 16th brought an unusual stillness to Buckingham Palace. While the rest of London began another ordinary day, inside the royal residence, two brothers prepared for what might be their final confrontation. Prince Edmund had spent the night researching his brother's business dealings, using his security clearance to access files that painted an even darker picture than their father had revealed. The documents were damning. Alexander hadn't just accepted consulting fees from Bahrain, he had actively lobbied British parliamentarians on behalf of Bahraini interests, had used his royal connections to facilitate arms deals worth hundreds of millions of pounds, and had personally profited from contracts that violated the spirit, if not the letter, of British law. Worse, he had done it all while publicly supporting human rights causes, making speeches about democracy and freedom while privately enriching himself from an authoritarian regime. Edmund sat in his private study, surrounded by evidence of his brother's betrayal, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist with The Guardian who had been pursuing the royal family's financial dealings for months. Your Royal Highness. Sarah's voice was professional, but urgent. I'm calling as a courtesy to inform you that we're preparing to publish a story about Prince Alexander's business relationships with Bahrain. We have documents that show significant financial transfers, and we wanted to offer the royal family an opportunity to comment. Edmund's heart sank. What kind of documents? Bank records showing payments totaling nearly £50 million over 5 years. Signed contracts for advisory services that coincided with major arms deals. Email correspondence discussing political influence operations. Your Highness, this story will run tomorrow regardless of whether we receive official comment, but we thought it fair to reach out.
After Sarah hung up, Edmund realized that Alexander's planned escape wasn't just about avoiding embarrassment, it was about avoiding criminal charges.
The evidence Sarah described would trigger investigations by multiple government agencies, parliamentary inquiries, and potentially international legal action. His brother wasn't fleeing to Bahrain for sanctuary, he was fleeing to avoid prison. Meanwhile, Alexander was having his own crisis. In his private apartments, he paced frantically while his longtime aide, James Morrison, tried to maintain some semblance of calm. "Sir, the jet will be ready at RAF Northolt by 10 this evening," James reported. "Sheikh Rahman has confirmed that you'll be met at Bahrain International Airport and taken directly to the royal compound. They're prepared to host you indefinitely." "Indefinitely?" Alexander repeated bitterly. "Do you understand what that means, James? It means I'll never come home. It means I'll live the rest of my life as a guest of people who own me." James shifted uncomfortably. As Alexander's private secretary for 8 years, he had watched his employer's gradual corruption with growing unease. The idealistic prince who had once genuinely wanted to serve his country had been replaced by someone willing to sell state secrets for personal gain. "Sir, perhaps if you spoke with your father again, explained the pressures you were under." "My father won't listen," Alexander snapped. "He's made his choice. Edmund is his golden boy now, the son who never disappointed him, the one who never had to make difficult decisions." A knock at the door interrupted them. Alexander opened it to find Edmund standing in the hallway, holding a tablet computer. "We need to talk," Edmund said simply. They met in Alexander's private sitting room, the same space where they had played as children, where they had shared secrets and dreams about their futures. Now it felt like a courtroom. "The Guardian is publishing the story tomorrow," Edmund said without preamble. "They have bank records, contracts, emails, everything." Alexander sank into his chair, looking older than his 34 years. "How much do they know?" "Enough to destroy you. Enough to destroy us." Edmund set the tablet on the coffee table between them, displaying Sarah Chen's preliminary article. £50 million, Alexander. "You took £50 million from a regime that tortures political prisoners." "It wasn't that simple," Alexander protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "The money was payment for legitimate services. I provided strategic advice, facilitated trade relationships, helped maintain diplomatic channels during difficult periods. You sold arms to dictators and called it diplomacy. The British government sells arms to those same dictators. At least I was honest about being paid for it." Edmund stared at his brother in disbelief. "Honest? You hid every transaction in offshore accounts. You lied to Parliament when they asked about your foreign business interests. You violated your oath to the Crown and your duty to the British people." Alexander stood abruptly, anger replacing resignation. "Don't lecture me about duty, Edmund. You've spent your entire life playing the perfect prince because you never had real responsibilities." "I had to make choices you can't even imagine." "What choices?" "The choice to betray your country for money, the choice to abandon your throne when the consequences caught up with you, the choice to ensure this family's survival." Alexander shouted. "Do you think the Crown can survive on ceremony and tradition alone? Do you think the allowances Parliament gives us are enough to maintain the influence necessary to protect this institution? I secured our future." "You secured your bank account," Edmund shot back. "And now you're running away to Bahrain while I'm left to explain to the British people why their future king was a paid agent of a foreign government." The brothers faced each other across the room, years of rivalry and resentment finally erupting into open hostility. Alexander's carefully maintained facade crumbled completely, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath.
"You have no idea what you're inheriting, Edmund."
"You think being king is about ribbon cuttings and state dinners? It's about making impossible choices between competing interests. It's about preserving an institution that half the country wants to abolish. It's about finding ways to remain relevant in a world that no longer needs monarchy. So you decided to make yourself relevant by becoming a criminal?" Alexander's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Criminal? I did what every member of every royal family has done for centuries. I used my position to secure advantages for my family and my country. The only difference is that I got caught." Edmund pulled out his phone, an idea forming that he knew would change everything between them forever. "Maybe it's time the British people heard your explanation directly." "What are you doing?" "I'm recording this conversation. If you're so convinced that your actions were justified, then defend them publicly. Explain to the voters why their future king thought it was acceptable to take blood money from torturers and murderers." Alexander lunged forward, trying to grab the phone, but Edmund stepped back, keeping the device out of reach. "Stop recording, Edmund. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly. I'm documenting the moment the heir to the British throne admitted to betraying his country and tried to justify it as protecting the monarchy. If you publish that recording, you'll destroy everything. Not just me, the entire institution. Is that what you want? To be king of a republic?" Edmund felt the weight of the choice before him. The phone in his hand contained evidence that would end Alexander's royal career permanently, but it might also damage the monarchy beyond repair. Publishing his brother's confession would satisfy justice, but potentially destroy the institution they had both sworn to protect. "You're asking me to choose between truth and family," Edmund said quietly. "I'm asking you to choose between revenge and responsibility. You can destroy me, or you can help save the crown. But you can't do both." The phone continued recording as silence stretched between them. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that the future of the British monarchy hung in the balance of a decision being made in a palace sitting room. Finally, Edmund made his choice. But instead of stopping the recording, he asked a question that would haunt both brothers forever. "If our positions were reversed, Alexander, if I had betrayed the crown for money and you held evidence that could stop me, what would you do?" Alexander met his brother's eyes, and for a moment the calculating politician disappeared, replaced by the older brother, who had once protected Edmund from schoolyard bullies and palace intrigue.
"I would do what I had to do to protect the crown," Alexander said quietly.
"Even if it meant destroying my own brother." Edmund nodded slowly, finally understanding the full scope of the choice before him. "Then you know what I have to do." The recording continued, as both brothers realized that their relationship, their family, and their future as royals would never be the same. In 6 hours, Alexander's plane would take off for Bahrain. But the conversation captured on Edmund's phone would determine whether he flew away as an exile seeking temporary shelter or as a fugitive running from justice. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the palace grounds, two brothers who had once been allies prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just their individual fates, but the future of the monarchy itself. The crown that had united them in purpose for 30 years was about to tear them apart forever. And somewhere in the palace, their dying father waited to see which son would prove worthy of wearing it. The recording had been running for 17 minutes when everything changed. Prince Edmund watched his brother's face cycle through anger, desperation, and finally, a cold calculation that he had never seen before. Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the palace gardens where they had played as children. And when he turned back, he was no longer the defensive, cornered man who had been justifying his actions. He was someone Edmund didn't recognize at all. "You want to know the whole truth, Edmund?" Alexander's voice carried a dangerous edge. "The truth is that everything you think you know about this family, about the crown, about our father, it's all carefully constructed fiction." Edmund felt a chill run down his spine.
"What are you talking about?"
"The Bahrain money wasn't my first venture into private financing, brother. It was just the most recent. Did you ever wonder how we maintained our lifestyle during the budget cuts? How father managed to keep the palaces running when Parliament reduced the civil list? How we funded your education at Oxford, your diplomatic training, your grand tour of the Commonwealth?" The phone in Edmund's hands suddenly felt heavier. "Alexander, what did you do?" "I did what needed to be done. Russian oligarchs pay very well for British respectability. Chinese businessmen will spend fortunes for access to Windsor connections. Saudi princes collect royal friendships like other men collect watches." Winwood. Alexander's smile was cold and bitter. "For 15 years, I've been the family's primary source of income. Every charity gala you've attended, every state dinner you've enjoyed, every privilege you've taken for granted, it was all funded by my arrangements with people you'd consider criminals." Edmund stared at his brother in horror. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Check father's private accounts, Edmund. Look at the trust funds that pay for palace maintenance. Examine the source of the money that funds your own charitable foundation. You'll find contributions from shell companies, anonymous donors, and charitable trusts that all trace back to the same sources I've been dealing with in Bahrain." The room seemed to spin around Edmund as the implications sank in. If Alexander was telling the truth, then the entire royal family was compromised. Every public appearance, every state function, every moment of their lives had been subsidized by criminal money. "Father knows," Edmund whispered. "Father knows everything. He's known from the beginning. Who do you think gave me the initial contacts? Who do you think provided the offshore account information?" The dying king with 6 months to live didn't suddenly develop a conscience, Edmund. He developed cancer, and he needs a scapegoat. Alexander moved closer, and Edmund could see years of buried resentment finally surfacing. "You think you're the golden child, the pure one, the son who never disappointed father. But you were never pure, Edmund. You were just ignorant. Every privilege you enjoyed was paid for with blood money, and now father wants to sacrifice me to protect the fiction that the rest of you are clean. Edmund's hand shook as he held the phone. The conversation being recorded was no longer just evidence of Alexander's crimes. It was a confession that would destroy the entire monarchy. If this is true, then we're all guilty. Welcome to the real world, brother. The world where maintaining power requires making deals with devils. Where keeping the crown means compromising everything it supposedly represents. I didn't betray the monarchy, Edmund. I saved it. And this is how I'm repaid. A knock at the door interrupted them. James Morrison entered without waiting for permission, his face pale with panic. Sir, we have a problem. Sheikh Rahman is on the phone, and he's agitated. The Bahraini government has received intelligence that British authorities are preparing to request your extradition if you flee to Bahrain. The sanctuary offer has been withdrawn. Alexander's composure finally cracked completely. What do you mean withdrawn? The Sheikh says the situation in Bahrain has deteriorated faster than expected. The opposition has obtained documents linking the royal family there to British arms deals, and they're threatening to release everything unless political prisoners are freed. The government can't afford to be seen harboring a British prince right now. Edmund watched his brother process this information, seeing the last escape route closing. So you can't run to Bahrain after all? No, Alexander said quietly. I can't run anywhere. The Americans won't have me because of my Russian connections. The Russians won't have me because of my American business dealings. The Saudis are too exposed right now to risk harboring a fugitive British prince. I've burned every bridge I built over 15 years. The irony was devastating. Alexander had spent years cultivating relationships with foreign powers, believing they would provide him with options and security. Instead, those same relationships had made him toxic to everyone, including the people he thought were his allies. James cleared his throat nervously. Sir, there's more. The Guardian journalist Sarah Chen has contacted the Palace press office. She says she has a source claiming that Prince Edmund is also involved in foreign financial arrangements. She's asking for comment on transactions from your charitable foundation. Edmund's blood ran cold. What transactions? Alexander's bitter laugh filled the room. Remember your foundation's largest donor, Edmund? The anonymous contribution that funded your education initiatives across Africa? That money came from a Chinese mining company that uses child labor. The hospital you built in Bangladesh was funded by Russian arms dealers. Your clean reputation was bought with the same dirty money as everything else. The phone slipped from Edmund's numb fingers, clattering to the floor but continuing to record. Everything he had believed about himself, about his family, about his life's work was crumbling around him. You made me complicit, Edmund whispered. You used my charity work to launder criminal money, and you never told me. I protected you, Alexander shot back. I kept you ignorant so you could maintain the moral authority that the family needed. Someone had to be pure for the cameras while I did the dirty work in the shadows. I didn't ask to be protected. I didn't ask you to make me a criminal. You didn't have to ask. You just had to be the perfect prince while I carried the weight of keeping this family afloat. And now, when it's all falling apart, you want to judge me for the choices I made to protect you. The brothers faced each other across a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Edmund saw his older brother clearly for the first time. Not the confident heir or the desperate criminal, but a man who had been slowly corrupted by the impossible demands of maintaining an institution in a world that no longer supported it naturally. There has to be a way out, Edmund said desperately.
Some way to expose the truth without destroying everything.
The truth. Alexander picked up Edmund's phone from the floor, noting that it was still recording.
The truth is that we're both criminals now, Edmund.
The difference is that I chose my crimes while you were an unwitting accomplice. But the law won't care about your intentions when they're calculating prison sentences. James Morrison had been silent during the brothers' confrontation, but now he spoke up with information that changed everything yet again. Your Royal Highness, he said to Edmund, I received a call from your private secretary 20 minutes ago. Your father has requested both of your immediate presence in the throne room. He says it's urgent, and he's asked for all senior staff to be present as well. Edmund and Alexander exchanged glances, both understanding that this summons was different from their private family meeting the day before. A gathering in the throne room with staff present meant an official royal announcement was coming. He's abdicating, Alexander said quietly. Father is going to abdicate immediately and force the secession crisis to happen now while he can still control the narrative. But you can't inherit while you're under investigation, Edmund pointed out. If you're no longer heir apparent, then you become king of a scandal-ridden monarchy with a criminal past and no moral authority. Alexander finished. Congratulations, brother. You wanted the crown and now you'll get it. But it comes with all the blood on my hands and all the secrets I've been carrying. As they prepared to face their father in the throne room, both brothers understood that the next hour would determine not just their personal futures, but whether the British monarchy would survive the revelations about to engulf it. The recording on Edmund's phone contained enough evidence to destroy them both, but it also contained their only hope of controlling how their story would be told. The walk to the throne room felt like a march to execution. Palace staff lined the corridors, their faces carefully neutral, but their eyes filled with the knowledge that they were witnessing history in the making. The great doors of the throne room stood open, revealing King William V seated on the throne that had been the symbol of British power for 1,000 years. He looked smaller than either son remembered, diminished by illness and weighted down by the knowledge of what he was about to do. But his voice, when he spoke, still carried the authority of centuries of royal tradition. "My sons," he said as they approached, "we need to discuss the future of this crown and the price of the choices we've all made to preserve it." The conversation that followed would determine whether the British monarchy entered the 21st century as a renewed institution or died in scandal and disgrace. And somewhere in Edmund's pocket, his phone continued recording every word, capturing the moment when 1,000 years of royal history balanced on the edge of a knife. The throne room had witnessed coronations, state ceremonies, and moments that shaped empires, but it had never held a scene quite like this. King William V sat upon the ancient throne, flanked by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister, and the most senior members of the royal household. Before him stood his two sons, both now aware that they were participating in either the salvation or the destruction of the British monarchy. Edmund's phone had stopped recording, but the weight of everything captured in those files pressed against his chest like a physical burden. Next to him, Alexander stood with the rigid posture of a man facing execution, his 15 years of secrets about to be laid bare before the highest authorities in the land. "Before we begin," the king said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "I want everyone present to understand the gravity of this moment. What we discuss here will determine whether the crown survives the next decade, or whether we witness the end of 1,000 years of royal tradition." The Prime Minister, Margaret Hayes, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I must inform you that my government has received preliminary findings from the Serious Fraud Office regarding financial irregularities involving members of the royal family. We have attempted to contain the investigation, but the evidence is too substantial to suppress." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "The evidence," the king continued, "suggests that this family has been compromised by foreign financial interests for over 15 years. The question before us now is whether we can find a path that preserves the institution while acknowledging the failures of individuals." Archbishop Williams, a man who had served 3 monarchs, spoke with quiet authority. "Your Majesty, the Church's position has always been that redemption is possible, but it requires complete honesty and genuine repentance. Half-truths and political maneuvering will not suffice in the eyes of God or the British people." Edmund felt the moment demanding his voice. "Father, before we proceed, there's something everyone needs to know." He pulled out his phone, the recording device that had captured his brother's confessions. "I have evidence that changes our understanding of this situation entirely." The king's eyes narrowed. "What kind of evidence?" "A recording of Alexander admitting to 15 years of financial dealings with foreign governments, arms dealers, and criminal organizations. But more than that, he claims that these arrangements were made with your knowledge and approval, and that my own charitable work has been funded by the same sources." Silence fell over the throne room like a heavy curtain. The Prime Minister's face went pale, while the Archbishop's expression grew grave. Alexander closed his eyes, knowing that his brother had just destroyed any possibility of a quiet resolution. "Play the recording," the king commanded. For the next 20 minutes, the throne room filled with the voices of 2 princes, destroying each other and their families' reputation. Alexander's confessions about Russian oligarchs, Chinese mining companies, and Saudi arms dealers painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning decades. His claims about the king's involvement and Edmund's unknowing participation in money laundering operations left everyone present stunned. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. "Is it true?" the Prime Minister asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of it?" King William V aged visibly as he prepared to answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man unburdening himself of years of secrets. "Most of it is true. Alexander came to me 20 years ago with concerns about the family's financial sustainability, Parliament had reduced our funding, Republican sentiment was growing, and we needed independent sources of income to maintain the monarchy's influence and relevance. I approved his initial business relationships and provided guidance on how to structure them to avoid direct legal violations. The Archbishop leaned forward. Your Majesty, are you confessing to knowingly accepting criminal money to fund the royal family? I am confessing to making choices that I believed were necessary for the survival of the crown, but which I now understand compromised everything the crown is supposed to represent.
Edmund felt the room spinning around him.
And my charitable foundation? Was funded through the same networks, yes. Alexander was correct about that. We used your legitimate charitable work to provide cover for financial transactions that we couldn't justify through other channels. You were kept ignorant to preserve your reputation and provide the family with someone who could speak with moral authority. The weight of betrayal crashed over Edmund like a physical blow. His entire adult life had been a lie, his charitable work tainted by the very corruption he had unknowingly helped to conceal. Alexander finally spoke, his voice hollow with defeat. I told you the truth, Edmund. I've spent 15 years carrying the moral burden for all of us, watching you bask in praise for work funded by blood money, while I bore the guilt alone. I became the criminal so you could remain the saint. But you enjoyed it, Edmund shot back, finding his voice through the shock. You enjoyed the money, the power, the influence. Don't pretend this was some noble sacrifice. Did I enjoy it? Alexander's laugh was bitter. I enjoyed having power, yes. I enjoyed being more than just a ceremonial figurehead waiting for my father to die. But I never enjoyed what I had to do to get that power. I never enjoyed lying to Parliament, deceiving the public, or watching my brother build his reputation on my crimes. The Prime Minister stepped between the brothers before their argument could escalate further. Your Majesty, I need to understand our options here. The Serious Fraud Office investigation will proceed regardless of what happens in this room. The Guardian story will publish tomorrow, with or without official comment. The government needs to know how to respond to what will inevitably become a constitutional crisis. King William V looked around the room at the faces of people who had served the crown faithfully for decades, knowing that he was about to ask them to make an impossible choice. There are 3 paths before us, he said slowly. First, we can deny everything, claim that Alexander acted without family knowledge, and sacrifice him alone to protect the institution. Second, we can admit to the full scope of our involvement and face whatever legal and political consequences follow. Third, we can choose a middle path that acknowledges wrongdoing, while attempting to preserve the monarchy through immediate and dramatic reform. What does the middle path look like? Edmund asked. The king's answer would determine the future of the British monarchy. Alexander abdicates his position in the line of succession and cooperates fully with all investigations. In exchange, he receives immunity from prosecution and exile rather than imprisonment. You, Edmund, become heir apparent but undergo a period of public service and penance designed to rebuild the moral authority of the crown. I abdicate immediately, allowing you to become king under a new constitutional framework with dramatically reduced powers and increased oversight. And the money? The Archbishop asked. The millions of pounds in criminal proceeds, returned to legitimate charitable causes where possible, seized by the government where necessary. The royal family accepts a reduced civil list and submits to the same financial transparency requirements as government ministers. Alexander listened to this proposal with growing disbelief. You're asking me to confess to crimes I committed on your orders, give up my inheritance, and spend my life in exile to save a crown that I've spent 15 years supporting? I'm asking you to take responsibility for choices you made, regardless of the circumstances that led to them, the king replied. And I'm asking Edmund to accept a throne that comes with the burden of redemption rather than the privilege of power. Edmund struggled with the magnitude of what was being offered. Father, even if I accept this path, how do we rebuild public trust? How do we convince the British people that the monarchy is worth preserving after everything we've done? By proving that institutions can learn from their failures and become better than they were, the Archbishop answered. By demonstrating that even kings can repent, and that redemption is possible for anyone willing to embrace truth over convenience. The Prime Minister consulted her phone, where messages were arriving with increasing urgency. Your Majesty, I'm receiving reports that The Guardian is moving their publication timeline forward. They plan to release the story online within the hour. The king understood that their time for private deliberation had ended. Alexander, what is your decision? For a long moment, the heir apparent said nothing. Then, slowly, he removed the signet ring that had marked his position in the line of succession since his 18th birthday. I accept exile, he said quietly, placing the ring on the arm of the throne.
But I want it understood that I didn't betray this family or this country by choice. I was asked to do impossible things to preserve an impossible institution, and I did them.
History will judge whether my sacrifice was worthwhile. Edmund watched his brother surrender his birthright and felt the weight of a crown he had never expected to wear settling on his shoulders. And I accept the burden of redemption, though I doubt I'm worthy of it. None of us are worthy of the crowns we wear, the king said sadly. That's what makes wearing them a duty rather than a privilege. As the meeting in the throne room concluded, Alexander prepared for a departure that would take him far from the only home he had ever known, while Edmund prepared to inherit a monarchy forever changed by the choices his family had made in the shadows. The phone in his pocket contained the evidence that had destroyed one brother's future and determined another's destiny. Outside the palace walls, London continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that the 1,000-year-old institution at its heart had just undergone a transformation that would echo through generations. The crown would survive, but it would never again be the same symbol of untouchable authority that it had been that morning. In sacrificing one prince to save the monarchy, the royal family had discovered that the price of survival was the very innocence that had made the institution worth preserving. But perhaps, in accepting that price, they had found something more valuable than innocence, the possibility of redemption, and the chance to build something honest from the ruins of their beautiful lies. The recording had ended, but the story it captured would reshape the British monarchy forever.